Hey everyone, and welcome to Reuben's Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why your brain seems to stick to what you just saw or did, influencing your next decision? Well, this new study dives deep into something called serial dependence, and it might just explain that strange pull. So picture this: you just saw a specific shade of blue. Then, the next time you are asked to pick a blue, you might lean towards that shade you just saw, even if it is not exactly the one you are supposed to pick. That is serial dependence. It's like your brain is saying, hey, what I just experienced is probably what I'm going to experience again. So let's just go with that. It happens everywhere. From seeing colors to making judgments. But here is the puzzle. Scientists have found that while our behavior seems to be drawn towards recent experiences, the actual brain activity sometimes seems to be pushed away from them. How can both be true? That is the paradox this research sets out to solve. The researchers propose a really neat idea. They call it the stable world theory. It's built on the idea that our brains naturally expect the world to be stable over time. Think about it. If you are looking at a wall, it is probably going to look pretty much the same in the next second. This expectation of stability, they argue, is key. It's a sensible guess because the world around us, especially what we see, doesn't usually change drastically from one moment to the next. Now, you might think, but what about when I move my eyes or blink or things move around? True, there are lots of changes, but the researchers argue that a basic expectation of stability is still super useful. If your brain just predicted things will change, that is not very helpful, but predicting things will stay the same gives you a precise starting point. This expectation of stability is actually baked into how our visual system is built, becoming more and more tolerant of small changes as information moves up through the brain. This makes recent experiences a pretty good predictor of what is coming next. So, how does this expectation of stability actually affect our brains and our actions? The researchers point to two main ways expectation can influence how we process information: sharpening and dampening. Imagine a bunch of brain cells called neurons that are like tiny detectors for different features of what we see. When we expect something, two things could happen. One idea is sharpening. This means the neurons that don't match the expected thing get quieter, making the ones that do match stand out even more. This would make our perception super precise for what we expect. The other idea is dampening. This is where the neurons that do match the expected thing actually get quieter. It's like the brain is saying, I already know this is coming, so I don't need to put as much effort into processing it. This conserves energy. Now, here is where the paradox comes in. Recent studies using things like brain scans show that when we expect something, the brain activity related to that expected thing is actually dampened, which pushes the representation of that stimulus away from what was expected. This is the neural repulsion. But behaviorally, we see the opposite. We tend to be drawn towards the expected stimulus. This is the behavioral attraction. So, the brain signals are pushed away, but our actions are pulled closer. How can this be? This is where the stable world theory steps in. The researchers propose that the expectation of temporal stability causes these two opposing effects in different parts of our brain's processing system. At the first stage, the encoding stage, when the brain expects a stimulus to be stable, it dampens the neurons that are tuned to that exact stimulus. This saves energy but makes the neural representation less precise and pushes it away from the original stimulus, hence the neural repulsion. But then, at the later stage, the preparatory stage, which is more about making decisions and preparing to act, the brain uses that same expectation of stability directly. It's like a shortcut. Instead of relying on the slightly repelled neural signal, the decision-making part of the brain directly biases itself towards what it expects the previous stimulus. Because this bias happens at a different stage and isn't directly trying to undo the encoding stage, it pulls your behavior towards the previous stimulus, causing that behavioral attraction. So you have one process at encoding that pushes away, and a separate process at preparation that pulls towards, both driven by the same expectation of stability. They happen in parallel, not one after the other. This also explains something weird about how precise our judgments are. When researchers looked at brain activity, they saw that precision was lower near the previous stimulus. But when they looked at people's reported judgments, precision was actually higher, not just near the previous stimulus, but also at the opposite extreme. The stable world theory explains this too. The dampened neural signal leads to less precision in the brain's raw representation. But the preparatory bias, which pulls your behavior towards the expected stimulus, adds precision back in. For circular things like orientation, where there is an opposite value, This can even create an illusion of higher precision away from the previous stimulus, while the direct pull towards the previous stimulus adds precision there too. It is like a two-part system. One part dims the signal, and another part boosts the decision. Interestingly, attention plays a role here, but it's not the whole story. Studies show that if you pay attention to a feature, serial dependence is stronger, but even if you don't, there is still a small effect. This suggests that while attention can amplify this effect, the basic expectation of stability and its influence on our brain and behavior happens somewhat automatically, even without focused attention. From a big picture perspective, this makes a lot of sense for survival. Our brains are designed to be efficient. If something is likely to stay the same, why waste energy processing it in detail? It is better to conserve that energy for truly surprising, informative events that help us update our understanding of the world. This is what the efficient coding principle is all about. The brain allocates resources where they're most needed. Now, a really important point, this expectation of stability isn't something the brain just throws away when it is in an experiment with repeating trials. That is because our expectation of stability is built over a lifetime of experiencing a generally stable world. Experiments are usually too short to override this deep-seated prior. This means that serial dependence is likely not a flaw in our perception itself, but rather a consequence of these higher-level decision and preparation processes. The attraction isn't because we perceive the stimulus differently, but because our decision-making process is biased. The researchers also draw a distinction between this expectation-driven dampening and something called sensory adaptation. Adaptation usually requires longer exposure to a stimulus and tends to sharpen neural responses, making things stand out more, not dampen them. The short exposure times in serial dependence studies and the dampening effect seen suggest it is a different mechanism. It is like the brain is reacting to a high probability of repetition versus adapting to prolonged stimulation. This stable world theory builds on and refines other ideas. It agrees with predictive processing models that say top-down predictions influence our senses. But it specifically says that temporal stability is the key prior, and that the effect happens at different stages. It also differs from continuity field models by not needing a separate mechanism for stability, instead deriving it from a learned expectation. Ultimately, this research places serial dependence firmly within the framework of predictive processing and efficient coding. It suggests that our brains aren't just passively receiving information. They're actively predicting what is coming next, using that prediction to save energy at the sensory encoding level, and to make faster decisions at the readout level. So, what's the big takeaway? The paradox of serial dependence neurorepulsion versus behavioral attraction dissolves when you consider the expectation of temporal stability. It's not a perceptual distortion, it is a smart strategy. Our brains suppress predictable input to save energy and then use that same prediction to quickly guide our actions. It's about a system optimized for action in a world that, for the most part, stays pretty stable from one moment to the next. This theory helps reconcile conflicting findings and shows how our brains cleverly balance precision and efficiency. Of course, science never stops asking questions. This study opens up new avenues. For example, can we directly show that interfering with decision processes stops the behavioral attraction, while leaving the neural repulsion untouched? Does the strength of serial dependence match how stable different features of the world are naturally? And what exactly happens in the brain when the bias shifts from attraction to repulsion over time? These are exciting areas for future research. So, next time you find yourself slightly influenced by what you just saw or did, remember the stable world theory. It is your brain being efficient, making a sensible guess based on the assumption that the world you are in is likely to stay much the same. What do you think about this? Does it explain some of your own experiences? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this interesting, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to Reuben's Mind Lab, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into the amazing world of the mind. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.